Dr. Song, and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate that. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for that warm welcome. I'm kidding. Maybe I need to get out more often, but I'm so excited to be here tonight with you because I know, and I'm not going to put everybody on the spot, but if I were to ask all of you, is not updating our facilities a viable option? I doubt I would see any hands. And I think for me, having worked 16 years in this school system, 7 of which were here as a principal and assistant principal at Dodd Middle School, 4 of which were as a principal at Cheshire High School, I certainly recognize there are substantial needs for our facilities district-wide. Every building needs to be updated. And I also want to just take a second to acknowledge the fact that that's not the fault of the 7 individuals and plus administrators on this table sitting up at the board today. I want to commend them because it is through much of their hard work that we're at a place where the community, the town council, in the survey was referenced, people acknowledge that we need to update our school facilities. And so, while there may be consternation over a plan, and it is important that we get it right, the fact that we're here is something that, I don't think I would have envisioned 10 years ago. So I'm excited to share with you this evening kind of, where we are very quickly, hopefully address some of the questions and concerns that are out there, identify the fact that we still do need more information on some things to be able to move forward, and then also establish kind of like what's next. So you and our full community understands, all right, what are the next steps here? And what sort of timeline are we exploring? I get chided by Mr. Martelli if I don't mention this is 2016. This is our last district building project. And if you've been to Cheshire High School at the concession stand, you go there, if you were there before. Now, I'll never forget as a high school principal taking my little boy to the restroom there because we've all been there. Dad, I got to go pee. And he's at the football game with me, and I take him into the restroom, and he just turned around and walked out. I'm not going in there, Dad. Now our facilities are something to be proud of, and it's a quality of life issue. It's a community issue, and our school facilities. If that's the pride that we can engender from a concession stand, I look forward to the day where we can do that for a school building in our community. So, that School Modernization Committee, and I give them a lot of credit too, because there were countless hours over multiple years that this was studied. And the committee was given this charge when there was unanimous agreement on the Town Council and Board of Education. Unanimous. I don't care what you throw out there. It's very hard to get unanimous agreement between both bodies that we needed to do something about our school facilities. I'll throw it out to Mr. White because I know what a history buff you want to. I don't want to put you totally on the spot. You know who that is.
I know who it is. He's a haberdasher.
The haberdasher. The pride of Independence, Missouri, Harry Truman, was president 70 years ago when most of our buildings were built. It gives you a little bit of a historical context of our current ages in the buildings. So the School Modernization Committee endeavored to collect facts for all school facilities. And there is a lot of this information is available, I would say all of it, on the Town of Cheshire website. And you can go there, you can see the full school modernization report. I know it was cited today. That's great. I think the more people that look at that, it's even more compelling that we need to do something. We conducted a community survey as part of that process, really about, would you be willing to invest in school facilities? And I have to say, I was really pleasantly surprised by the positive feedback there. Mr. Perugini talked about Colliers as a project leader group. They help us tremendously put this information together. And then we developed, I think it was 13 different scenarios, of which we whittled that down to a preferred and secondary scenario. Why modernization? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because I think there's unanimous agreement that it's necessary. But beyond that, I want to highlight the fact that it's not simply modernization for modernization's sake that's necessary, but it's also fiscally prudent. Because, we talked a little bit already about the fact that, we don't want to be throwing good money after bad in the community. Nobody wants to do that. It's a terrible waste of taxpayer money. If we have a plan, we avoid that. And for many years, and again, not the fault of anybody sitting here, and I don't want to disparage previous, I know previous boards have certainly worked on this and councils have, but nobody's been able to come to agreement. And that's why it's so critical to come to agreement now so that we can develop a plan and, it's just fiscally sensible moving forward. As part of our process, we toured a number of different districts and buildings, Guilford High School. If you've been there, one of the things I love is a dad with kids that are involved in different events. That's the cafeteria at Guilford High School. On the left side is the gym, on the right side is the theater, and then there's the cafeteria servery here. So at 4 o'clock at night, they open up the cafeteria servery. Families come to, wait for Sparky to finish playing basketball or whatever the case may be. You can hang out here with your other child. There's Wi-Fi. You can do work, wait. It's just really, really incredible. South Windsor has constructed multiple, I think they're on their 4th elementary school now in the last several years. We toured those facilities. Meriden, I think this is Platt High School in Meriden, had a renovation is new. So enrollment projections. Now, this is a key question for us. Over the last 16 years that I've been here, we started, I think, when I was my first year here at Dodd Middle School, we had about 900 students. And we've seen a precipitous decline from the 5,500 students we had then to the 4,200 and change we have now. That is projected to rebound, not to that previous high, but substantially. And Jim mentioned the fact that right now we're over enrolled, 21, 22. Now, SLR or Milo and McBroom, when this was done, projected our K-6 enrollment at 2185. It's like 2230 right now. Just today, Scott Jeffrey at Highland was telling me that we have 5 more enrollments that we're anticipating, and they've already come in and started to register. And so we know that that number is legitimate and that it's growing. And the question about what's the time frame for an enrollment projection? So the state requires a 10-year enrollment projection. They won't allow you to say, well, yeah, but year 11 or year 12. They fund on a 10-year enrollment projection. And so this projection was conducted at the end of 1920, and so we have 21 through 30, that 10-year window there. And so we are seeing significant growth. A lot of that is not just what we've seen in turnover in our community with respect to residences, and not just development. a lot of it's predicated on birth rate. So we get our enrollment projections from NASDAQ, a firm that does that for us. And, we had seen, as it says here, 209 to 212 births in a typical year. That's Cheshire residents. Now it's over 300. So demographically, things have shifted. Our birth rate's over 300. And what the demographers recognize is we have something called the persistence rate of 1.5. So every birth of a Cheshire resident, every Cheshire student that's born in town, 1.5 kids enroll because we have children that move in. So, that's a lot of what's driving these numbers northward again. I also like to think that it's the quality of our school system. We've always had a great school system. If you've heard me speak before, a little tongue in cheek, I say people don't move here for the nightlife. We have a great school system, and that just underscores how it's so important to take care of that school system. It also underpins residential home value in our community. So that we really have to take care of that and invest in the school system, not only for our students, but economically as a community. So here's our 10-year projections with respect to space. This is Darcy School in the upper left-hand corner. You'll see that last year we were encroaching on, the target rate. This dashed line is the target for enrollment in the building. The solid blue line is capacity in the building. So this year, this academic year, which is the second bar in, you can see we've far exceeded that. We had to move kindergarten classes from Darcy this year to Doolittle, and that we just didn't have space to do that. I think one of my greatest fears for us moving forward is that nothing gets done. In a year or two, we're talking about where are we going to put the portable classroom at school X, Y, or Z? You want to talk about throwing good money after bad. All this data right here, what we've seen in the shift in the town demographically answers the question, why couldn't we just do a high school, or, why aren't we just thinking middle school first? Or we absolutely need to address the overcrowding issue at the elementary schools. And there are various ways to do that. We'll talk a little bit about that, but this is what, is on the precipice for us, where you see schools, Highland exceeding their capacity, and Norton the same, Chapman, Darcy already has, with the shift of 100 students roughly from Darcy to Doolittle. Now this graph looks different. So that's where this is. So scenario discussions, the things that we've discussed in that process, we wanted to look at a holistic approach to the various scenarios that we have. And, I was having a conversation before this meeting. There are so many variables that go into making a decision about what's the appropriate plan. Selfishly, from where I sit, the most important one is what's educationally in the best interest of our kids. That's a critical, variable that I think we all agree upon. There are other variables, finances, accessibility of a site, transportation, location. There are a number of variables that can be considered. And the School Modernization Committee went through a variety of variables. Again, this is on our website, and looked at how do each of these variables weigh in to make their decision about the preferred and secondary option. So preferred scenario summary, just to bring everybody up to speed, was 2 K-6 elementary schools located, one at the north end of town and one at the south end of town, possibly on the Norton site. Existing Darcy and Chapman buildings are taken offline. I'm going to come back to why Darcy is highlighted, and Vin promised to remind me later. Norton would be demolished if we build the new Norton on that site. Redistricting will be addressed later on in terms of how does redistricting in this preferred option versus the secondary option, what does that look like? And then we would have phases 2 and 3, where renovations to all other schools would be done over time. Now, as we do future phases, are required by the state to do an enrollment study again. The enrollment study is necessary for them to fund us at reimbursement. Our reimbursement rate for new construction at the state, Vin, is, I'm not great with exact numbers, 46? 30? Yeah, so 32 and 42. So 32% for new construction is the reimbursement rate, 42% for renovation. Looking at the Norton test fit, and we'll make sure that this presentation is on the website because I know you don't have binoculars with you, but this is the Norton, or the North End Marion and Jarvis test fit. They presented 4 different versions of what that would look like in terms of bus traffic, pedestrian traffic, vehicle traffic. And what you'll see here when you look at this in closer detail later is that the entire perimeter here is the actual plot itself. There's a line that you'll see traversing the site that outlines where wetlands exist. There's also a dash line that highlights where there's a current sewer line where you couldn't dig through that. So, you know, as much as the property itself is rather large, there's a fair degree that's not necessary, you can't build upon. So we had a firm outline 4 potential options for there. Now, the town council had made a recommendation to consider moving Humiston and central office to that site. I think part of the rationale is it's 109 years old, the building, and it's not handicap accessible, has numerous code compliance issues. And to be fair, just like I would say about our parking and arrival and all that, it's a lot like other buildings in our district, to be honest. So there are 4 different plans that were designed by architects to kind of highlight what a layout potentially on that property would look like for a new North End Middle School that would replace Chapman, be larger than Chapman School, and we would redistrict to alleviate the pressure that we're currently experiencing, or that we anticipate really experiencing as enrollment increases. Now, this is one phase of that. The other phase that has to happen simultaneously is basically doing the same thing at Norton, where we would build a new school behind the existing Norton school. They, you know, put a wall between the construction site and the existing building, and start construction behind that building. What you'll see here, and this is a construction access to the rear, and it's also you know, available for bus traffic potentially if this site were to be fully developed. The architects came up with 2 different test fits for that site. The costs, when you look at the new North End School and new South End, which also assumes a demo of Norton, the total cost there is between $72 and $87 million. That's after reimbursement. The gross cost is 108 and 130 for the construction of those two facilities. That does not include doing anything with Humiston to move that school and central office to a north end site. That does not include that. The alternate scenario, phase one, is the construction of a new 6 through 8 middle school. Unfortunately, to my surprise, and this is what's different between 2021 and when the board had previously moved forward a new middle school, the construction of a new middle school and pulling 6 through 8 into that school does not do enough on its own to alleviate the enrollment issue that we're going to have. So you would then not only have to build a new 6 through 8 middle school, but you would also have to build like basically a replacement of Chapman at the same time. And a site for that would have to be identified in this phase. The plan would be to take Darcy offline in that process, and then redistricting is required. And like in the other scenario, renovations are then done to other buildings. One element of this that's not available in the other plan is that Dodd Middle School, upon the opening of a new middle school, would serve as what's called swing space. So if we're working on an elementary school that's wouldn't be a new construction in terms of how this plan was designed to be in renovation, the preference would be to not have kids there when the renovation is taking place. It can definitely be done. It's done every day all over Connecticut, but it's more efficient, cleaner, a better scenario if we were to move students from that building that's being renovated to this building while we renovate that building. Just faster, more efficient. Now, what do you do when you get to Highland? Highland just doesn't, work well here. It's too many kids. So, that probably wouldn't be Dodd wouldn't be an adequate swing space for that situation, I don't think. But that's just a consideration. So what are the costs of that plan? And I want to talk in a little bit about how this, what this ultimately translates to for the average taxpayer. But, gross total budget, $154 to $185 million for the two buildings. Net post reimbursement, 100 to 124 million, round numbers. Subsequently, we would still have to, work on updating our other buildings. Because as we acknowledge, we don't have the luxury of saying, well, it's just this building that we have to worry about. Phase one is not the end of the story. There's still going to be other kids in this community, no matter what we do, that need facilities updated. Comparison of preferred and alternate scenarios. And I think this is, really kind of where the rubber met the road for our committee. And I think it's good to articulate this for the public. So the point was made about the projected enrollment, the larger projected enrollment of the middle school at, roughly 1,200 students. As a former middle school educator, assistant principal, I don't necessarily see that as the world's largest hurdle. I was principal here with 900 students. We did a lot at that time, and we still continue to do organizational and structural things that make big schools small. We put, grade levels on wings, or floors. We, put them in teams, students in teams. It's much more intimate. And it's a great model. And it's been really successful for us in Cheshire. And I think that we could do that with 1,200 students if need be. But the state did say, in all fairness, that that's something that they don't like to see. They didn't say it was something that we would never do, never consider, because there are other schools that do. Hamden's doing it right now. There are other districts that do it, and I think we could do it. But I would remind you again, unfortunately, that in and of itself does not solve our enrollment. You still need to build another building at the same time. So that's one element that we looked at. The projected enrollment for the two schools is, within the scope, 653 and 669 for the new Norton and new Chapman. That does balance our schools a little bit better. Right now we have one school in Highland that's substantially larger. In this process, the school sizes would be 653, 669, 612, and 780. That it is somewhat, easier from a staffing perspective. I will go back to the middle school scenario because I've been asked this a number of times, starting, and I have to give our chair, Mr. Perugini, a lot of credit, because if he's asked me once, he's asked me 1,000 times, like, what do you think is best educationally? And my answer is there's a 1A and 1B. From an educational perspective, I've openly shared with him and the modernization that I do see some benefits to 6 through 8. Our teachers have said that. And the first thing I did was ask them, our middle school and our sixth grade teachers, who suggested that, that was preferable. But it's not, like I said, it's a 1A and it's a 1B. It's hard to argue that what we've done over the last many years has not been successful. We have the 5th best performance in the state of Connecticut on the current system. It's not broken. And so I'm not necessarily looking for a solution to a problem we don't have. Do I think it's preferred if all other variables are equal? Yes. But as I mentioned earlier, there are a lot of variables that go into this decision. And so that's, just my feeling on that. So schools taken offline, eliminate costly improvements. Darcy is an amazing program in a building that's not so amazing. Chapman, same thing. It's shameful in my mind that we really have buildings that aren't handicap accessible in 2021. I know we can do better for our kids there as a community. So redistricting, the difference between the two, in the preferred scenario, the 2 elementary, 18% of our community would have to be redistricted in order to address the situation with enrollment. And in the alternate scenario, 15%. So it's, it's not a dramatic difference between the two. The estimated district share for phase 1 projects differ by about 37 million. So what's the tax impact on that? So this is from the accounting office at Town Hall. The tax impact for an average taxpayer for phase 1 projects differs by 223. The 2 elementary school scenario is $389 a year for the average taxpayer, with a market value of their home of $303 or $304, and 2 cars valued at a total of $13,000. That's over how many years, Ben? 20, right? 20 years. So that's the average cost over 20 years. Some years a little higher, some years a little lower, as the rates fluctuate. $389 a year on the average.
Jeff, is that the 70% or the 100%? Okay, so
Yeah, that's the market value, 100% on the home. Yeah, thank you. The alternate scenario cost with the middle school and new elementary school is $612 a year for the average Cheshire taxpayer for the next 20 years. And I don't make this decision. I weigh in on this decision. I weigh in on what's best for our kids and our community. Full disclosure, I want to make sure something happens. Something needs to happen. I've been here, as I said, this is my 17th year in the district. We need to move forward. And we're at a real, crossroads here. And I don't think that if we were to pull the trigger on a decision now, the last thing that we could be accused of is making a snap decision. I mean, 7 years later here, this is not a snap decision. There are a lot of variables. And again, I want to reiterate, no matter what happens, and Tony has repeated this 1,000 times too, sometimes to the chagrin of some others, this isn't the end. Phase 1 cannot be the end, because you end up leaving a lot of kids and families in a difficult situation. I received the gong usually from Vin, but we're getting to the end here, but it's a phase. It's the first phase of what needs to be subsequent phases. So I think when you consider financially, that's a reality. When I consider the fact that educationally, we're not talking about, apples and oranges. We're talking about a nuanced difference that provides some benefit, absolutely, as I see it, but not dramatically shifting the course of life for our kids by any stretch. So, based on the information here, that's where the committee came up with a 9-3 vote to support the 2 elementary school options. Additional considerations that these are hurdles that we still need to cross. Things that we have not put a bow on that I really, I don't want to speak I do speak for the board a lot, but I'm not going to make this decision for them. There are some questions that I know I have, I'm sure they have, that we just want to try and tie up before they ultimately vote on a plan to move forward. And I've tried to outline some of them here. There's been a suggestion from members of the council that a new central office, Hummiston School, be added to the North End Elementary project. I think that's admirable and ambitious, but we don't know the gross cost. We've been given an estimate to build that on that site is $12 million. To engage in a full renovation of Hummiston and Central Office would be $7 million. But the trick there is that we're not so sure that the state will reimburse renovations on a 109-year-old building. We got to find out. We got to know. The estimated gross cost, if we didn't do a standalone Hummiston School and Central Office on the North End, but did it as part of a wing of a building, right? So it's part of the same footprint, different entrance, things like that, but it's like an extension on your home kind of thing. It's just an add-on to the facility is $9 million. That's also a lot of money. The other question that we have is the estimated cost of renovation, as I mentioned, would be $7 million for Dodd. But again, that needs to be verified if the state would even do that. But the piece that I missed that I know Vin will want to remind me of is Darcy School. Um, when we look at the financial estimates provided by the town, it doesn't look like Darcy and those students are factored into the financial equation. We have to make sure that that's the case if they're indeed planning on closing that building. And what's the cost there? How will that shake out? Is that something money that's better spent in the immediate future on moving the Darcy programs to the new elementary school on the north end? My opinion on that is probably. You're serving a lot more kids by doing that. It's critically important for Darcy, who, if you don't know and not familiar, that has a birth to 3 program. We identify students with some of the most significant needs in our community. Birth to 3 provides coaching and intervention for those families. It's run out of Darcy School. It's state contracted. Then we have preschool, and we have a Smart Start program, which is also a preschool program there, which supports students with individualized education plans and their peers for transition into kindergarten. We still have kindergarten there because it's so critically important. The synergy that exists between those 3 programs is really critical for those students who have significant needs early in their life. Early intervention is paramount. And so we can't split those programs up and put them in different places because we compromise the quality of our program. So when I'm talking about, educationally, what are things that, are critical non-negotiables, that's one of them. The 6-8, 7-8 is not for me. And I know I speak for Marlene and our team on that. So, that's something that we need to get an answer to, but I think before we really say, okay, this is the right, because this is a significant commitment, obviously, when you look at those numbers on the board. Inventory of current space at Humiston. You can't read these. I appreciate that. We'll get this on the website immediately so that you can see this. It basically outlines the space that we have in that building. We have about 30 students who participate in an alternative high school program, a number of other students who receive support tutoring there. We also have in that building our central office team. It's a lean team. There's not, relative to our peers, we have myself, Marlene, Vin, and then Human Resources Director, K-8 Curriculum Coordinator, Special Ed Director, and then we have support staff and our finance department. Our food services department is run from that building. Technology as well. I think that covers them all, right, Ben? So, that group would need to be housed someplace. And again, as I think, it's difficult for me to worry about when I invite people to a meeting at that building, if I know it's not handicap accessible. So what do? I've seen a student crawling on his knees up the stairs on crutches. And I know our community can do better than that. But I also know we have needs everywhere. That's the thing. They're everywhere. And we have to identify what is the priority need. I really feel like if I had to weigh out the two, supporting the 100+ students at Darcy into that new building, and we still could and should continue to do things to support our kids at Humiston. I'm not saying that they're not as important, but when you look at I'm not as important. We're not as important as our students. So just something we have to weigh out. Inventory current use of space at Darcy. Those programs are a little bit bigger. Like if you had your child in a private pre-K program, a preschool program. They're larger rooms. There are a lot of cool stations there. That needs to be replicated wherever we go. And the state has been very clear that they are very supportive of the additional square footage beyond what they would typically approve for specialized programs like that. So, critical questions, again, what are our critical priorities? Is replacing Darcy a greater priority than updating Humiston? We have to figure that out. What are the costs of each? Again, these are not just binary issues. They're multifaceted issues that we have to consider here. State reimbursement on Humiston, would they even do that? We're still trying to figure that out. Definitive costs. What are we looking at definitively after these questions are answered? Before I think it's fair to ask the board to vote on this, or the council ultimately. And then what are the implications for future phases? What would that, kind of look like at this point in time? Now, again, after we do any phase, when we go back for another phase, we need an updated enrollment projection. That's required. And then ultimately, for me, it's really important to know, does the board have all the information they need to make any sort of decision? It's a critical decision. It's an exciting time for us. I hope that come April, that we are at referendum. That's the timeline, that we are moving forward on a plan that works for our kids' community. Again, no matter what it is, it's going to be phase one. So finalized test fits for the north end are what we've been working on to make sure that works. Before anybody says, well, this is predetermined, so you didn't do any sort of look at all at a middle school. We've already had test fits on the north end for a middle school. We know that it will fit there. And the previous test fit for the middle school wasn't as thorough with respect to the wetlands. So we realized that the wetlands are actually a little bit more of a hindrance than we had in that original test fit, but it would still work. We need to develop something called educational specs. That's what we have to draw up for what the building would look like in terms of room spaces, whatever. The state needs that for our reimbursement, critically important. The board would need to vote to approve a plan. And they're certainly aware of the expedience of this, that this really has to be done as soon as we can, feasibly do it, because we want to make sure that this goes to referendum soon, April. Then town council vote to appropriate needed funding, and then ultimately the voter referendum in April. And then we have to submit a school construction grant by the end of the school year. So the clock's ticking. I'm excited because I know we all agree that we have to move something forward. And I hope that my presentation this evening gave you more context, gave you more information, cleared your sinuses, and I'll certainly entertain any questions from the board. There. Tony?
I laugh because I know taking down my mask will probably be a meme on me and unplug the mask off tonight, but that's okay. It is what it is. So Jeff, without getting too much ahead of tomorrow night's town council meeting, we've had some informal discussion with Collier's or the test fits. One of the things that came up was town council's question, can we move Darcy birth to 3 and even a pre-K to Highland? Will it fit? Based on what I heard tonight, your preference is not to put it at Highland. That if
it wouldn't, if we were to move our Darcy students to Highland, there just wouldn't be space for that. And there would have to be a significant investment to create the space, which isn't factored into the numbers that we're looking at here. Alternatively, we need to confirm that any Darcy space added to a North End, what would that do financially if we are prioritizing closing Darcy in phase one?
So that was my second question. In your opinion, how critical is it that we address Humiston and Darcy immediate in phase one? Is that something that can wait until after the first elementary school or two elementary schools or even a new 6th grade middle schools built? Where does that fall in your prioritization process and sequencing?
Sure. I think from an educational perspective, the services that are delivered at Darcy are, they're second to none. The facility itself, though, is in dire need of updating and, just regular maintenance things like windows, et cetera. If we put off maintenance of that facility, or if we put off taking kids out of that facility and doing something, there's going to be cost incurred to maintain it until we get to that next phase, which I don't know that that's a great fiscal decision. I think it's a little bit of, like we talked about before, throwing good money after bad. And then, we also, though, have the consideration of Humiston, the students there, the facility there, code compliance there as well. And I think it's important that we get the information from the state as to whether or not they would support that. If so, how much, support would they give to that? But educationally, I think, we're providing a great experience in both places. The clock's running.
That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to piggyback off of something that Tony said also. So if we were to go with a 6 through 8 middle school project, would taking the 6th grade out of Highland make it more feasible to put the Darcy program at Highland?
Yeah, it's a great question. And yes, to a degree, but when we talk to Colliers and the demographers, it's not enough to not build another elementary school. You would still need, even if we pull the 6th graders out of our existing schools, with our trajectory for enrollment, we still need to build another elementary. That would only exacerbate the issue.
Right. My understanding also is, though, no matter what we do, we need a new Chapman. So it's not just because of enrollment. It's due to the ADA compliance and all of that with that school as well.
I can't argue that. No, I know you're not. But I would say, again, the point was made earlier about, have you been to Dodd for arrival and dismissal? And yeah, but that's every building. And Chapman is kind of like that everywhere too. Chapman is, I will say, probably one of the worst as it goes to that stuff, but none of them are winning the beauty contest.
Just a timing question. You keep saying you need to hear, You say you need to hear from the state with regard to Darcy and Humiston reimbursement and everything. Have those questions been submitted, and when can we expect an answer, and what can we anticipate what this is going to do to town council projections?
I don't know. These questions have been discussed and raised with Colliers, who is pursuing that with the state. Unfortunately, I don't have an update on that as of today. It is relatively new as we've started to make sure that all these things are working right. And so I know that Chuck Warrington from Colliers is working to address that. And we need an answer yesterday, right?
Yeah.
So that's where we are. We are pushing it.
So OSTGR, the Office of State Grant Reimbursement, they're the folks who kind of balked at the idea of a 1,200 student middle school. Have we gone back to them, or could we go back to them while Colliers is going through the process, just to say, like, you know, get something more formal in writing from them saying that they wouldn't support a middle school of that size?
To say that they would or they would not.
They would or they wouldn't?
I don't think that they would say, we're not going to support a middle school of 1,200 kids. They're not going to say that. We know that they do that. There's other buildings in Connecticut where they've done that. Not many, but it's happened. It would have to be, clearly articulated how those services are going to be provided and how you're going to make 1,200 kids work. But they didn't say, no, we're not going to do it. They just said it wasn't their preference. They would want a lot more information from us to be able to articulate how and why it was going to work and how it fits into the bigger plan for our facilities. Which, I mean, we could deliver that. So, I mean, they didn't say no, but it's an additional hurdle. But if our community felt like absolutely we have to do it this way, I'm sure we could get it done. But, when I think, as I've said, is multifaceted, as I sit here trying to rationally digest all of these different pieces, from educational enrollment to financial, I can understand why the SMC settled on the solution they did.
I think Tim was.
Thanks, Andrew. The test fit at Norton, did that include an environmental impact study?
Vin, I don't think so, right?
So the only thing I'm curious about, I don't know who's ever walked the woods back in Norton, is there's a culvert back there that could be 70 years old, which is, as I understand it, that's kind of the age where something officially becomes a wetland.
Yeah.
I'm just
I do
wondering if
know
there's
that
any-
we did discuss the culvert. They were certainly more than aware of that on the
Okay.
property. They did walk the site.
Yeah.
They did review all of the information that the town has, GIS information on the site, and we're very thorough in our conversations. But that's a next layer. I think they have to do core samples and everything in both locations. I mean, that's part of a future process.
Okay.
Once approved.
There was nothing, they're experts, they have some knowledge, and there was nothing
Yeah.
that jumped out at them as being an obvious deal breaker.
It's a great
In
question
relation to
because
the culvert,
it
yeah,
did
okay.
exist and they didn't say anything that it was a problem to us.
Okay, thank you. So the numbers that we're putting out there, I'm thinking I recall these numbers from a year ago, pre-inflation. I'm just curious, does Colliers have, they're building models. I'm assuming that they could pump in some numbers and give updated numbers.
Yeah, I think,
And would they be willing to do that?
Chuck addressed that. Vin, do you want to?
The scenarios that were modeled out by Colliers do include a construction inflation as we go through the different phases of the plan. And I believe they used 4 or 5%. I don't remember which.
Okay, so it's built into the model, so they could.
Built into the long-term model, yes.
Yeah, well, no, I think there was like a new CPI announced today and stuff, so I'm just, okay. It could get put in and get updated numbers relatively quickly. Okay, thank you. Humiston, so those numbers you put out there, they just surprised me, the 7 million and the 12 million, and the reason I say that is I'm just looking at it as a per square foot. Humiston's 15,000 square feet, so this is for the public. Correct me if I'm wrong, 15,000 square feet, split half and half between administrative offices and the high school. It's 30,000 square feet?
15 on each side.
Oh, 15 on each, oh, okay,
Roughly.
okay.
Yeah.
All right, then those numbers make sense, because I was thinking the numbers look like
Yeah,
they were
and-
twice what they should be.
Unfortunately, we've endured the fact that it does cost more to update that facility at 109 years old.
Sure.
You know, I remember several years ago when we had the slate tiles blowing off the roof, which becomes a real damage when you have, or, you know, potential issue, danger when you have flying rocks through the air. And it was expensive because we had to replace it with slate.
Yeah.
So there are definitely issues in updating a building, but it's still, you know, may ultimately prove to be cheaper to do that than to build another facility.
Okay.
But, you know, I think these are questions that we really need to get answered before we say, oh yeah, this is our plan and here's why.
Well, you know,
Close.
the numbers in my mind, they make total sense now that
Yeah,
you said the building was twice the size than what I thought it was.
right, yeah, yeah.
Let me see. And the last thing, so taking the buildings out of it, just thinking from a programmatic perspective, there's discussion about, for 7 years now, we've been discussing
Yeah.
this, including a 6 through 8 middle school. Has there ever been any discussion of a 7 through 9 middle school?
No.
Okay.
Um,
And off the
And
cuff,
I think, you know, from an educational perspective, having been both a middle and high school principal, I wouldn't recommend that.
okay.
I think that transition to high school where you have access to a lot more clubs, activities, for a lot of our students that are college bound, having access to the breadth of activities and experiences at Cheshire High School is really pretty critical. And in addition to just, you know, music, arts, the choices that our students have matriculating from elementary to middle school are enhanced. That's one of the arguments for a 6 through 8 middle school. Those are doubled when you go from middle to high school. And so, you know, I think what we'd be doing is inadvertently limiting our freshmen, and I really wouldn't recommend that.
Okay, I'm trying to understand in my head why it would necessarily be limited, but I'll take it.
If they are in a different building on a different schedule and stuff that we would typically have to do for busing. And then for a facility, I'm assuming it would be on a different location than the high school, which I think is right. Yeah, ultimately. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, real quick. I wanted to piggyback off Andrew's question. So when we went in front of them, was it March, April? It seemed like it's so long ago. The reason why I ask is back then, we did not have out of SMC the formalized plans voted upon in the detail that we have today. And whether this board makes a vote or the next board after the election, I'm not sure about the timing of that, would be possible, and we'll have to consult colleagues on this, based on these plans that we have now, based on your preferences, I think it'd be worthwhile to go back and say, hey, this is where we landed. Walk them through the plans and see if they have a visceral reaction in either one. Specifically Darcy and Hummelstein, I really would love to know what their thoughts are on reimbursing a 109-year-old building, because it's cheaper to do that. In my mind, and it works for us, that's, you know, another $4 or $5 million I could put to phase 2. We're into phase 1. So I'd be worthwhile to know that question. So I'll ask colleagues tomorrow night at the town council meeting if that's something that they would recommend doing.
It's a great question. I think it makes sense. Chuck, our lead from Colliers, has repeatedly said, continuing to connect with OSCGR through the process really supports an expedient facilitation of our grant request and ensures that, you know, we have money flowing in during the project. The Hummiston location where it is certainly, from an educational perspective, favorable to the north end for a couple of reasons. First of all, with our alternative high school program, we have a number of students who split time between the school at Hummiston and Cheshire High. And we, you know, 5 minutes down the road, if that is really convenient for that. Additionally, as we've increased offerings at Hummiston, we're splitting staff time between CHS and Hummiston. And, you know, having that access in the center of town is very helpful to be able to say, all right, I can run an art teacher over for a period to provide that service to those students at Humiston. And so we've been able to expand offerings in business and other things that may have traditionally been limited or only available online. So, it is beneficial from an educational perspective to have it where it is as well. But it's a great point to, solicit OSCGR on those issues.
Couple of things. So Jeff, you said that when you were showing the test fit for Norton, it said pending school end or south end location. I assume that means pending approvals, that it would be a go, right? Or what did you mean by that?
So I think what we're talking about is on the north end of the site. Here, is this what yeah.
You just had mentioned pending, and my concern is, I'm just trying to interpret what you mean by pending. Like, you're pending approval. What happens if if we're not able to make that work? What's our alternative for Norton? Is it going to be reno as new? Is it going to be leveling existing Norton?
Right. So
I think we got a plan for that.
Yeah, so access to the facility for construction isn't wholly predicated on this, but this is definitely the best way to do it and limit disruption to the existing site. There is an easement back here that's town-owned that exists. We can access that. So if this site were to be approved, that would be happening is the way I understand it. Vin, any caveats to that as I've just suggested or no?
I guess we won't know until we know for sure, but the belief is that we can certainly use that for construction access. And then the desire would be to use it as
A bus,
exit
yeah,
out,
yeah.
out, and then, we can certainly control or dictate when buses would come in or out that entrance. Right?
Mhm.
Limit.
With a gate, right. So that there's not perpetual traffic in the neighborhood, but for bus arrival and dismissal.
To be sure, this is the plan. I mean,
It's one of two options.
yeah, no, I
Um,
know, but I mean, there's nothing that's going to really stymie us from putting something in that south end as far as,
I would answer that with a bit of a qualifier, not foreseen. There's nothing that foreseen at this time that would hinder our ability to do that.
because I should think that would possibly affect the price of the project, the cost of the project if we had to.
Yeah, there's nothing foreseen that would not allow us to proceed with either of those two options.
And I don't want to I just want to urge one caution with regard to that inflation. You mentioned that Colliers was using a 4%, 4 to 5. That was when CPI was in the 2 to 3 range. Now with it being at 5, I'm just wondering, could we ask them for?
Yeah, absolutely.
their
We can ask them
assessment on that?
tomorrow. We'll ask them, immediately to see if they can provide us anything for tomorrow night.
Okay, thanks.
What I would add to that is that, Colliers did provide a low and a high for each of the projects and each of the scenarios. So you won't know what the cost is till you get this approved and go out to bid, but there's enough of a range that, if the construction inflation increases a point, I think you'll be covered potentially. If it increases 5 points, then that's a whole
Right.
different set of financial questions that we would have to address. But my only point is, there is a range that's already been identified, low and high. We've been talking on the high end, just to be conservative as we walk through the different scenarios.
Thank you.
Regarding the Norton property, I think Colliers might discuss this tomorrow night, but if I'm not mistaken, Jim may know, one of the town council members asked about the cost difference between renovating Norton or building U as being proposed. So I think they're going to talk about that detail. But I think one of the test fits they drew up that might be shown tomorrow night is what it would look like if you could not build a new parcel in Norton and had to use what was there. It's not renovate as new, it's keep in place and add on as new. So you'd be stuck with the existing layout, which has its pros and cons. But that would fit. The construction access will still have, the one entrance from the front of the school. But I think we have more answers tomorrow night about that. I will say that it is a little cheaper to renovate Norton, but there's offset. So if that were the case, just think worst case scenario, if this was the plan, you cannot put a new school on the back of Norton for various reasons, and you had to use this in footprint, that means we are doing renovation while the kids are in school, which means portable trailers. And I think the estimated cost of $1.2 million per year, probably for a couple of years. So keep an eye out for that tomorrow night, ask that question and get more detail. So let me put that out there. Sorry, Adam.
No problem. In stereo, maybe. So, yeah, that's what I thought. Hold on. Okay. Can you hear? Which one's on, Mike? This one? Okay. All right. So going way back 10 minutes ago, the reimbursement rates for Humiston, you have on here 42% for, because I can't take my glasses off, 42% for the school side and 21% for the office side. Is that for the new construction that possibly could be in the north end, or is that a reimbursement rate to do the 109-year-old Humiston building currently? And is there a difference if it were to be built as new?
Vin?
The answer is, in both cases, the central office reimbursement is 50% of what the school reimbursement is, because it's a central office and not school space per se. So if we were in that scenario that you see, that was the renovation rate, 50% of 42 is the 21. If we were looking at new construction, it would be 32% and then 16% for the central office space. That's subject to confirmation, by Colliers with the state, but that is the rule that the state follows for reimbursement of central office or non-educational new and renovation. So the 42% number here, that's just a regular renovation of Humiston. That's what we're talking about. Okay. So then as new or building a new structure in the north end would be 34% for the school portion and not that much. Right, yeah. 17% for the administrative.
Central
portion.
office.
Okay.
And that's why, when Tony says, can we go, confirm this in essence with OSCGR? And yeah, I think that for us to make a good decision, it's important to have the right information and verified information. And we're really close. There's been a lot of work done. I think we're really close. It's just, dotting I's and crossing T's. And, again, if we have to be really conscious of this isn't the end of the road, and making sure that we can afford subsequent phases and commit to subsequent phases.
Just one last question. We were talking about the secondary option, the 6th through 8 school, but then you also had the new Chapman. And the one thing that hasn't really been discussed here tonight is where would Chapman go? Because there was talk way back when that it would be built at the Chapman site, but there was no really thought as to how it would be worked out or if the traffic would remain the same essentially. There's not a whole lot of room there.
The only way to effectively do that would be, a significant multi-story, because the building footprint itself, first of all, would have to be built while the existing school is there, which, confines space substantially. And then if you are to address. I mean, I know we've talked about being at Dodd for arrival and dismissal. Chapman's no picnic. If you're to address that, that has to come off the street, all that traffic, and onto the property. You need space to be able to do that, as you've seen in these other test fits. So it's really not feasible on that site. There are potentially some other locations, but there aren't a lot of options. There really aren't. And that's another consideration.
Thank you.
Thanks. I just think it's important if we're talking about renovating or relocating or building new for Humiston Central Office Building, that we also think that if we were to build a 6 through 8 middle school, we have this facility that could house the Humiston and the central offices, and be used for swing space, and, I don't know, put Parks and Rec here so that down the road, we can build a new high school on that property. But I know I'm getting way ahead of myself. But as we are talking about Humiston, we do have a scenario that would be a much cheaper than $12 million renovation, right under our noses, I feel.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. To use Dodd is not just swing space, but an ultimate home for Humiston. That would be many years down the road. So the construction of a new school, it would be roughly 3 years from the point we have referendum till we open. So that would be phase one. If we start to use subsequent phases, maybe that's ambitiously 5 to 8 years down the road. We're doing renovations. That process is about 2 years. By the time we get to be able to relocate over here, I really, would love to see this space be utilized in that way if we were to do something like that. But I also recognize that that is a super long way off in an ambitious environment. It's a long way off.
So I don't know if this is a question for you or for Colliers, but as you know, one of my concerns is serious consideration of sustainable buildings. All the numbers that we're looking at here, I presume, are all based on legacy processes, legacy model. Yeah,
Construction.
yeah, and that's in short, that's initial, the lowest. I shouldn't say lowest. The capital costs, without considering the operating costs, the cost of the fuel, the gas, the oil, whatever is heating the building. I'm just wondering, do you know right now at what point in the process, assuming the process goes according to the way it's built right now, at what point in the process do we look at a sustainable building rather than just looking at these costs that are based on historic models?
I know that Chuck from Colliers has said that, that definitely needs to be a consideration as we go into design and planning. I'm not necessarily, obviously, an expert in construction, so I think that's something that we'll ask him to speak to tomorrow.
So just really simple then, at what point right now in the process would design and planning happen? Before or after referendum? Do you know?
Probably after,
Okay.
to have full design. We have to design educational specs now.
Yep.
Which is like, what is the building use? What would we be looking at? But then ultimately, architectural stuff happens post-referendum.
Okay, so I just want to say that I think that from my perspective, that discussion would need to happen before we go to referendum, because the referendum number is the initial cost, but we're getting the life cycle operating cost too.
Right, yeah.
So I just want to put that out there.
It's a good point. Operations are a factor. And I think, given the fact that our average building is 70 years old, no matter what we build, it'll be dramatically more efficient. But I still think, to your point, that we should aspire to be as green as possible, not just for environmental impact, but for future operating costs as well. Agreed.
Yeah, and
So
lots of-
we'll ask Chuck to speak to that tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
On the north end property, there is no natural gas service there. So for what it's worth, it'd be oil, but I believe Vincent, I don't know, I don't want to speak for you, but, if that does happen up there, could be an opportunity to engage the gas company, see if they at least want a service line to that area. So I'll put that out there, in case you're wondering. So,
Yeah, and I mean, just to follow up. We haven't, I don't know where the nearest natural gas line is, but we would certainly prefer natural gas over oil. But that said, certainly when we get to building design, which will happen after referendum, that's where we would have to incorporate whatever additional energy improvements we want, whether it's solar or geothermal. Those would all occur during that design phase, which is going to be lengthy. It's probably a 1-year process to design a new school after a referendum is approved. So there's lots of time and lots of discussion that I know we'll have to.
I don't know the detail that it would go into it really, but I'm just going to say it one more time. I really truly believe that there should be some numbers on the table regarding that before we go to referendum. Because the numbers could be significant for the initial cost, but not necessarily for the operating costs, offset by the operating costs. Thanks.
Yeah, the point you made about life cycle cost is relevant. Yeah.